Direct from Foxborough, Massachusetts, the gem of Norfolk County, and taped at the studios of Foxborough Cable Access. It's Foxborough Central, and here's your host, Bob Hickey.
Hey, anyway, we're here in the Hearn Middle School, eagerly anticipating election results. Kathy Brady, the election officer, will be announcing those shortly. While we await those results, we are joined and honored, pleased, happily
Bernard Dumont
with the
Advisory Committee.
Fantastic. So the Citizen Advisory Committee, they do all the research and the really the nuts and bolts digging into the warrant articles. And so the town meeting is on Monday, May 14th, and that's at the Foxborough High School. What time does it start?
I think it's around 7-ish.
Okay, and so what we want to do is make sure that everybody's encouraged to come on out, make your voice heard, make your opinion known. You're the ones who are the legislative branch here, so let's make sure that everything that happens is supposed to happen. But how do we know what's supposed to happen? We rely heavily upon our Citizens Advisory Committee. So first of all, how many years have you been on the committee?
Actually 3+.
Okay.
And last year I was the vice chair, and to your point, this year, Bob, I'm the chair. And if I may say so, actually complementing to what you said, the advisory committee has an essential function, which is exactly what you said, is that we are responsible to provide recommendations to the town voters, to the town residents, of basically all the department budgets as well as the warrant article. So it's a critical function because essentially the voters and the residents are looking up to us to basically see how we vote for the budgets, the department budgets and the warrant article. So it's a critical function for the town. And if I may add, people like myself, actually I'm very humbled to be part of this process, because before being part of this process, I never really understood, let's call it, how government politics work. And this is an encouragement for actually pretty much everyone who can afford a little of their time to hopefully join this type of committees, because what it provides to us is, at the end of the day, is how lucky we are to live in a town like Foxborough. The process, all going to town hall, is very democratic. It's very transparent, and the way we go about it, we have a lot of internal debate, but at the end of the day, again, it's all about making sure that we have a balanced budget. We spend within our means, but to meet the town requirements in terms of the spending, and the warrant articles do reflect the hope and the wishes of the voters, essentially.
You know, that's a great point also. And first of all, to the volunteering, you're a volunteer. There are so many volunteer opportunities here in town, so many committees, and we always say that, or at least I always say, that Foxborough is built on the backs of our volunteers. Nothing could be closer to the truth than we're talking about the advisory committee, because how many people are on the committee? 15?
We're actually 12.
12 people, and then you're tasked, if you will, with finding a bit of information that makes sense for all of us, but finding a lot of information that needs to be summarized into a couple paragraphs so we can understand at town meeting. That's a hard thing to do, particularly when you're talking about a $68 million budget, particularly when you're talking about a 30 component warrant article for zoning, particularly when you're talking about liquor licenses, where the dynamic is a little bit different. It's a citizen's petition as opposed to a government initiative. So all of these things require a different skill set, and you said that you were new to town government, yet we're relying upon you and your fellow committee members to be our investigative arm. So a lot of credit to you.
No, thank you very much. But again, I'm very humbled to be part of the process, because I've always been in the private sector. And on a selfish what I would say is that I'm learning that it's very challenging to basically manage a government like a P&L, what we call a profit and loss account. Because at the end of the day, we're in the business of managing a town, but it's not 100% comparable to the private sector. So I've been very humbled to learn that. The other thing also is...
You have 17,000 stakeholders, 11,000 of which have the ability to vote.
Correct.
At any given time, they can say, hey, we don't like that.
The other thing also that I've learned through this process is that compared to the private sector, it's very complicated to make everybody happy. You can't make everybody happy, but at the end of the day, we all live in the same town, and we have to try to do the best we can to make sure that we all strive to make sure that everything is balanced enough so that we can live in the town we live in, which is very, very good.
Well, I love this part of the year where we get to talk about this, because I'm a local political junkie, if you will, and so let's dig in, shall we? So we are talking to Bernard Dumont, who is the chairman of the Citizens Advisory Committee. We have annual town meeting coming up on Monday, May 14th at the Foxborough High School. So on this year's warrant, first of all, how many warrant articles are there?
We have 24.
24. Now those 24, how many are basic housekeeping, would you say? Are there a number of those, police contracts, fire contracts, a fair number
question.
that we just go through?
I would say the most important one, at least to me, being having a finance background, is what is Article 4, which is actually the budget itself.
Okay.
So it's roughly $76 million going into 18, and it's, to your point, I would say close to 47% of this 76 million is the school budget, and then we in the outcome we go into the detail into every single budget. But overall, I would say that as far as items that are, let's say, cleanup items, maybe 4 or 5, but there are some new items, such as, for example, finding a way to have more transparency into our CIP process.
I know there's been some discussion about that, from taking the CIP from a up or down vote to a line-by-line vote.
Is that
correct?
True? That's exactly correct. And again, it's all to make sure that not only we have enough transparency, but we have enough check and balance, and make sure that, again, all the monies that are being proposed to be spent is well vetted, essentially.
Is there anything on the CIP, which is the capital improvement plan? Is there any item on there that's a controversy, or this is typically where we buy school buses and ambulances? Is there anything of interest on there?
I would say that in past years you probably heard about basically the money that we have to spend for the at the high school, for the field, essentially.
For the turf field,
for the turf field, exactly.
Built up the Sam Burns
but
field,
most of us actually in the outcome, we've supported it because we believe that it's for a good cause. In past years, like everything else, there was always the issue of what I call the push and pull. It's, do we have enough money to fund it? Because very much like in business in that sense, it's how much of it is a want versus a need.
Wants versus needs, absolutely.
So today, we are, again, privileged enough in Foxboro that we have good sources of fund. So as far as the uses, I believe that all of us in the outcome, we've been pretty much satisfied that there is sufficient fund to basically meet all these CIP needs, and we're all in favor for it.
I think that we in Foxborough are in a blessed position. We have strong businesses. We have Schneider Electric, that of course is a major employer and reinvested heavily in this community, as well as the Craft organization, all they do up on Route 1, not only with the Patriots themselves, and with that funding stream, that's a big part of our CIP, because Finance Director Randy Scollins long ago advocated strongly that we not include potentially non-recurring revenue in our annual budget, and so that money does go towards CIP spending, which then allows us to be in a position where we can afford really to do a lot of these things.
That's exactly correct. To your point, both, again, the highest regards for both Bill Keegan and Randy, as well as pretty much everyone who's heading all the departments. Not only they are managing significant budget amounts, but they are making sure that everything is within budget. And so
there's no red flags out there this year.
No.
Nothing that is should be startling that we're going to go and go aha.
Correct.
No
correct.
ahas.
No ahas.
I like no ahas. That's the way it's supposed to work.
And to your point, this is my 3rd year, and I would say that being humble, what I've learned is that there are people who very much care about the time, like ourselves, and what we've learned is, again, everything is managed within budget. Probably the most important thing I would say that what I've learned also in terms of the source of funds, I think 64+% comes from basically property taxes as far as the source of fund. What's coming from the state is decreasing every year, and that's a very important. Talking about red flag, the funds coming from the state is decreasing every year. So the rest has to come from basically businesses. And like everything else, we have to manage that carefully, not to overgrow the town type of things. But this is why I think the Route 1 zoning article are very important for us to consider, because these projects will basically make us who we should be in the future. And I encourage everyone actually to come next Monday to really understand what I call the favorable impact on what Route 1 zoning will have for us as far as the town. because it's what I call sensible growth.
Sensible growth.
But making sure that, again, everything to be taken into account is well managed to make sure that we don't overdo it, essentially.
Well, let's talk about that. So not to overly simplify it, but there's really two big issues on the warrant this year. Am I incorrect in that? One would be the citizens petition for for additional alcohol licenses from the state ABCC, and then the second one would be this omnibus zoning. So let's talk liquor first, because I think it will be easier to get through. What exactly is the article proposal, and then what is it that we're supposed to do?
The bottom line, actually, the Board of Selectmen needs to petition the state to basically have, for the citizen who is asking for it, basically an additional full liquor license.
How many?
Just one.
Just one. So this is a citizen's petition for one additional liquor license.
Right.
Is this for a specific business, or is it for the node that can be awarded to anybody?
I believe it's for that citizens, but that issue again is people who have it versus who do not have it. And like everything else, what we're all learning, actually to your point, this is the only article that pretty much came to a draw, meaning from an outcome standpoint, the vote was 4-4-2.
No,
meaning
really?
that it did, technically speaking, it hasn't passed. That's the only one. But
so it came out with no recommendation, or a recommendation not to approve because it didn't win the vote.
Correct. And
interesting.
What that tells you is very much the controversy behind it. But the important thing about all these articles is the fact that it's one thing for the Board of Selectmen and whomever present articles and us in the outcome to have our votes, but the fact that it makes it to the town warrant is very good, because now the voters, hopefully they will come in full pretty much next Monday, will come themselves to pretty much have their say.
But let's be honest, the town warrant, anybody can get anything on the town warrant if they get enough signatures, right? And so this warrant article is actually an exercise in how we operate as a local government. Somebody wants something, they got enough people to sign a petition, and then it was placed on the warrant. So to that end, it's interesting in that it wasn't actually a government initiative. Most of the articles are put on by committees, or the planning board, or the board of selectmen, or the board of health, things that are done to improve how we structure our government. This is unique in that it's actually done by a private citizen who has a business that wants to have a license.
Bob, to your point, this article proves exactly what you just mentioned. At the end of the day, we are a very democratic town, and the process allows for everybody pretty much have a voice. And my bit of disappointment is what I would call, for a lot of our residents, not understanding the privilege and right we have to exercise our vote.
And we heard that from a candidate for selectman also, who said pretty much the same thing.
Again, now being part of the process, all it takes, maybe I oversimplify it, but basically is leave work, at regular hour and come and vote. But it would make such a big difference, and that's why I even encourage the same thing in my neighborhood for anyone who's 18 or more, even younger, to understand what we do and how we do it, and understand the privilege and right we have here to exercise our vote, and the influence in a positive way we would all have, and understand how our town is run. Because I always go back to the basic. Bob, we all need the same things. In 5+ more years, I'm hoping that the value of my home will be worth more today than tomorrow, for all the reasons we know. I also hope that the same great job that's being done with the public service, health, and the security, all these things will be, again, we want a nice place for our kids to live, but also we want basically to increase our wealth in equity terms, in the value of our home, and that means better school system. Basically, it's a trickle-down effect, right? So for that to happen, I really believe that what I have learned myself is people like you, myself, and everybody in town to take their time, and we all have busy time, to understand how the process works. And with all due respect, I love newsmakers, news reporters, but to me, newsmakers are very important too, doers. And what I like to see in this town is that we also have a lot of people who make things happen.
Yep.
But for me to appreciate it now, I would have to be on this side. And in fact, I will tell you something that I have learned is, every time I see something, let's say, not going too well, I've learned to either provide constructive criticism or to understand why. And as I told you, this is why I feel very humbled to be part of this committee, because now for the first time I understand how government works. Again, I know I'm repeating myself, but why it cannot be like the private sector? But it's important to have balanced budgets and sensible way of spending to meet all of our needs that is down. And the advisory committee in that respect is composed of people from all different backgrounds.
Yep.
We have people with
It's a
lawyer's
diverse group.
degree, and which is very, very good, because that allows us to basically appreciate and evaluate someone else's opinion and where they're coming from.
So, and then people on the advisory committee, of course, are appointed by the town moderator, and you serve for 3 years.
Correct.
And you can be appointed twice, and then you have to sit back for a little bit.
That's correct.
That's right. So it's a lot of work, and thank you so much for doing that. I am going to just give a quick shout out to town meeting, which is on May 14th. We are talking with Bernard Dumont, chairman of the Citizens Advisory Committee. Next, we're going to have an extensive conversation about the town meeting warrant article about zoning on Route 1. It's been called an omnibus measure, over 30 different parts to it. Actually very important that we understand that, so I'm looking forward to that conversation. Right now we're waiting the count, and my understanding is that we are waiting the manual tally because there was nobody running for a seat that's vacant on the Board of Health. Long-time Board of Health member Paul Mullen moved on to retirement. Good for him, and thanks to him for all of his years of committed service to our community, particularly on the Board of Health, but also in so many other committees. I had the honor of serving with him on the Deposit Reservoir Restoration Committee, and that was a good experience. I learned a lot and met a good friend. So all the best to him, but nobody else stepped up to it, so they have to do a manual count. It might take a little while, but it's good because I'm fascinated about this article and I really want to learn about it. So do you have some time?
Yes, I would say
Let's
that
roll up the sleeves and let's have at it,
in
shall
a
we?
nutshell, Bob, very much what you've explained before. What we tend to do in the outcome is we go into the details. I can give you an example. We have essentially lead liaison for each article to basically the
Assigned
department
and people
itself.
should- yep.
And that's very important because the lead liaison has basically also advisory committee members with them, and together they really dig in basically the issue at stake. And I can tell you that with the zoning 1 articles and the importance of us understanding it, the liaison in charge has spent over 40 hours over free time to basically make sure that everything was well versed. Let me just first go on what I call the outlook. From a vote standpoint, 9 of us were in favor of basically everything being proposed for the Route 1 zoning.
Okay.
1 was against and there was 0 neutral.
So it was 9-1-0 vote in favor of approving the omnibus warrant article for Route 1 zoning.
Correct. And this is a very
Okay,
important
thank you.
note because, again, after all the due diligence and after all the detail of basically what Route 1 the zoning would be, for us to come out to that vote, I think it's very important for the voters to take that into account. Now, like everything else, I'll give you a specific example. We talked about that before, is some of us were concerned into what I would call extended development. But what we've learned is that every single department, and the planning board, I have to admit, has done a fantastic job in terms of making sure that all the vetting with the DPW, with the police department, all the duties were done to make sure that it would be, again, a sensible growth. Because last thing we want is overgrow and then regret it. Let's say having issue with water.
You only have one chance
supply.
to do it right from the beginning.
Correct.
To go back and redo something or revise it is so much more difficult than just doing it right in the first place.
Correct. But now to your point also, Bob, what's also important to note is that we are lucky to live in a state like in Massachusetts because between biotech, between all kind of industries, and what I would call the new generation, because some of us are pretty much in what I would call the retirement mode, right? The new generation to physically come and work in Foxborough, some of them don't even drive. So if we don't find
It's a different reality.
if
You're
we don't
correct.
find a way to basically make sure that we have businesses who can, and facilities for those millennials to come here in town and work, and if we don't find the right infrastructure to provide to the businesses, sewer, water, and what it takes to come and make our town to bring to the next level, it goes back again to basically we won't be able to sustain our budgets.
And the funny thing that I've always, not funny, but it's just the reality, you mentioned the difference between government and the private sector. I think the number one difference is that in the private sector, if I own a company, if you own a company, if you have a board of directors and you're doing all those business things, you can have longevity. In government, it's not set up that way. It's set up to have fresh voices, new ideas, elections. In fact, tonight we have some 3 people running for the Board of Selectmen, the highest policy-making board in our town, and an incumbent of many, many years may be voted out. And if that happens, there is a fresh new voice who needs to be re-educated, but more importantly, may have different ideas. And those ideas are going to completely cycle through the next year and the next year and the next year, because these boards are not meant to be permanent. And that's the beauty of town government, but also the frustration, because everybody talks about a 5-year plan. We're going to make a 5-year budget. Nobody has to follow a 5-year budget. It's an idea. It's a grand idea, absolutely. But we're set up to make sure that there aren't dictatorships and there aren't family hierarchies, and that we're not set up in a way that new people can't come and make a difference. So it's very interesting, isn't it? So this is the one opportunity for zoning to make sure we do it right.
That's exactly, to your point, if you look at the year we are in, which is 2018, this is a critical year for us to think about the next step. I always go back, Bob, to what I've learned after what I would call the Big Dick experience in Boston. This was the most...
That was a lifetime ago.
Exactly. People forget even how much money we spent. Now, without going to the details, all I recall was the actual spend was way much more than what we... But in return, if we didn't do that as a state, today Boston would not be...
Wouldn't that be something?
So,
the outcome absolutely is superior to what it was.
Exactly.
So.
And even here in Foxborough, one could argue we are indirectly benefiting from it. And I go back again to home values and so on. So my point is the same thing for our town. If we are not basically careful on how we understand the sensible growth of Route 1 and the zoning and so on, 20 years from now, where will we be? And we have people, as you've mentioned here, who are spending their time, their free time, to understand what's the right thing to do for our town and make sure that we'll be in the right set for the next century for our kids.
And in the late 90s, when the economic overlay district was first proposed and a lot of education occurred, a lot of proponents and opponents hashed it out, and the right decision came, there was a belief that there was going to be some phenomenal growth opportunities, and indeed there were. Patriot Place, hang on a second. We're listening to Bob Cutler, our town clerk, praise everybody for their behavior. And he's doing his plea to have anybody who is here who gets elected to stay and be sworn in. So it must mean we're getting close to having the results read.
If there is one thing I would like to say, Bob, is first of all, I am very, very pleasantly surprised on how all of our meetings, some of them are, let's say, fairly tough. We sometimes agree to agree, sometimes we agree to disagree, but I am very, very, very glad to note how everyone is extremely professional at all levels, from the executive office to, again, the planning board, the police department, the fire department. As far as questions, they all come prepared. If they don't know, they are not sure, they come back, but the professionalism in our town at all levels is remarkable.
Those are great words, and I'm sure that it's reflected from the top down with the way you conducted yourself and the way you organized your committee. So congratulations on that.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Well, so with this zoning article, is voted 9 in favor, 1 against.
Correct.
Is there any particular piece of this 30-odd point article that might be of interest?
That's a good question. I would say that it's so detailed, the voters should pretty much pay attention to what basically will be said at town hall. I'll give you an example, and we talked about it before. Water is a very precious resource, right?
Absolutely.
So there were quite a bit of questions around, all these projects, will they come at the end of the day hurt us, on residents going forward? We have basically the assurance from the DPW and everyone who's an expert in town to assure us that this growth will not come at the expense of water.
And of course, you're referring to the fact that we seem to have an annual water restriction. So the word is in, the results are in, so I'm going to pardon you for a second. If you want to stay here for just a second, we can talk at the end, and we'll be right back. Right now, I'm going to walk over, and we're going to talk to Kathy Brady, who is our election commissioner. Give me a second. I'm ready.
All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So tonight's unofficial results for Foxborough's annual town election on Monday, May 7th, 2018. Start at the bottom. Planning board member for 3 years. We're to vote for 2. Kevin P. Weinfeld, 1,539. Tracy Vasile, 1,523. Boyden Library trustee for 3 years. We're voting for 2. Colin Ernst, 1,549. Deborah Stone, 1,543. Board of Health member for 3 years, vote for 1. This was write-in candidate Todd Whitehouse, took it with 50 votes. Water and Sewer Commissioner for 3 years, we're voting for 1. Michael P. Stanton, 1,564, running unopposed. School Committee member for 3 years, we're voting for 2. Christina Bellinger, 1,449. Nancy Morrison, 835. Richard Pearson, 1,230. Assessor for 3 years, voting for 1. Lori Rudd, 1,540. No, that's incorrect. No, that is correct. 1,540. It's been a long day. I want to get it correct. Selectmen for 3 years, we're voting for 2. Virginia Coppola, 1,021. Christopher Mitchell, 1,370. Leah Gibson, 1,319. Those are our unofficial totals for tonight. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Kathy Brady. As always, the elections here in Foxborough run not only professionally, but with transparency. It is a pleasure to be able to bring these results to you live on Foxborough Cable Access. Stay with us for a few more minutes. I'm talking with Bernard Dumont, who is the chairman of the Citizens Advisory Committee. So the election results are in, and for selectmen, we have Chris Mitchell retaining his seat and newcomer Leah Gibson coming in second place, and that means that she and Chris Mitchell are our new selectmen. And much thanks, of course, to Virginia Coppola. Jenny has served our community many, many years, and it simply comes down to, I guess, the voters wanting to see a fresh face and give somebody new an opportunity. So congratulations to all 3 people for running. What are your thoughts on the selectman race?
Well, to your point, thank you. I know actually Ginny very, very well also, and what she's contributed as far as value out to the town is cannot even be measured in dollars and cents. So it brings up again to your point as far as we live in a very democratic town, and as far as the process, the voters have spoken. As I mentioned to you, my little wish is that when I hear just 1,000 plus minus, I just wish that based on the number of residents we have that who are over 18, we would have many more engaged. But hopefully with time it will happen.
Well, it's interesting. I know that my count of the polling stations before we came on the air seemed to be about just a little bit under 2,100 voters. Of course, we'll get the official count from Bob Cutler later. That seems to be roughly 20%, just a little under 20% of the registered voters in town. So not a horrible showing. Maybe a few more would have been wonderful to see, but all in all, it seems to be pretty good for a non-national election.
Agreed. And to your point as far as the results, it doesn't hurt to have, let's call it fresh blood, because again, very much like the advisory committee, it's important. If anything, it's very good because what it shows is that as a town, we have residents sometimes, again, who come in, who are new, and bring new perspective, and that's how we grow in every way, not just financially, but our values and pretty much, and that's why, again, for me, I've been living in Foxborough over the past 20 years, and I have been extremely beyond content, and now that I'm part of this process of how governments are run, I understand now why it's a good place to be.
Well, and then also speaking of new blood, we had definitely a new opportunity due to the retirement of Bruce Gardner from the school committee. There were 3 people vying for 2 seats. Incumbent Tina Bellinger came in first place. She's re-elected to her seat on the school committee, and also newcomer Richard Pearson has been elected, so congratulations, Rich. Also congratulations to Nancy Morrison for running a very strong, positive campaign. I think town is well served whenever people do run a positive campaign. I think we're blessed that way, that we have an air of professionalism and positivity. People have ideas, not wanting to tear other people down. So best of luck to the new incoming board of school. It's always a challenge because we all love our children, and while we can argue over a pothole being fixed, don't you dare do anything to mess up my child's education. So they really have the hard role, I always say.
Bob, you've said it well. Every time we go through what I would call controversial issues, we always remember what this is all about. This is all about, first of all, our families here, hopefully a town which will continue to prosper and manage in a way to have our future generation remembering what we did. We meaning people like myself, yourself, and so on, took their time, and again, we don't get compensated. We did that at our free time. We make the time to make sure that we understand how the process works.
I suppose the greatest reward is looking back and saying, you know, this little difference or that little difference was something that I had a hand in. And I'm glad that in your role in the Citizen Advisory Committee, you're helping us to understand what's going on and maybe make it a little bit easier for all of us to digest.
Bob, thank you very much again.
Well, thank you, Bernard, for taking the time. Bernard Dumont with the Citizens Advisory Committee. And you heard it here on Foxborough Cable Access. The winner of the race for your Board of Selectmen, Chris Mitchell, the incumbent, is re-elected, and newcomer Leah Gibson has been elected to, both have been elected to 3-year terms, and they joined David Feldman, Jim DeVellis, and Doc Elfman on our board. So all the best to them in the future. Congratulations to all the people who are serving our town, including our new school committee coming in, Tina Bellinger, who is the incumbent, re-elected, and newcomer Richard Pearson, who takes his seat that was most recently held by Bruce Gardner. Thank you to Nancy Morrison and Jimmy Kohler for your time, efforts, and everything that you give to make our process work.
Last thing, please make sure that you all come next Monday to vote. Very important.
And that's that annual town meeting. Very important that you show up. There are a lot of issues that affect our community, not only today, but for the next 20, 30, 40 years. It's important that your voice be heard and that we all make a collective decision based upon the information we get, but also it's our future and it's our town, so we better make sure that we do it right. On behalf of all of us here at Foxborough Cable Access, again, Mike Stewart, thank you so much for being behind the camera, Mike Everson, Lauren Bitar, Mike Weber, the people who put this all together, both here at the Ahern Middle School as well as back at the studio. We hope you have a wonderful evening. I'm Bob Hickey, your host. Have a great night, Foxborough. Take care.